discusses the library board's role in advocacy using data, storytelling, and relationship building. And I'm just going to introduce our presenters. Heidi Fendrick is the State Data Coordinator and a library consultant at the Utah State Library. She has been with the State Library since 2018 and began working in libraries in 2009. She is passionate about data, librarianship, and helping people find ways to use their data productively. Rachel Cook is the Grants Coordinator and a library consultant at the Utah State Library Division. She has been in that role since November 2017. She has a Master's in Arts Administration from SUU and loves assisting libraries across the state however she can. She loves her family, clever pop culture references, and tacos. Jerry has worked for the department in a variety of positions, beginning at the Utah Arts Council as the Public Information Officer, Economic Development as Public Information Officer during the 2002 Olympics, and then as Communication Manager at the Utah State Library. Jerry's background includes being a television producer at KUTV for 16 years, where she started the Baby Your Baby program, Wednesday's Child, coordinating producer for Sky 2 Helicopter, and produced all news programs, which include noon, 6 p.m., and 10 p.m., and the early 4 p.m. news shows. She also spent 8 years at KSL TV and radio as a long format producer, producing many documentaries on a variety of subjects, including abuse and foster care. She has earned 8 Emmy Awards and a National Iris and other regional and national awards. Dan Compton grew up in Green River, Wyoming. He has worked at the Summit County Library since 2005 and has been the director since 2011. He served as president of the Utah Library Association in 2017-2018 and currently serves as the co-chair of the Past Presidents Committee. Thank you to all our presenters for being with us today. I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over now to Heidi.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the objectives for my presentation are how to deepen your understanding of data about your library and community, and to introduce you to some strategies for communicating data to stakeholders that helps them meet their goals and your goals. Librarians often have difficulty talking about what we do in terms of concrete benefits, and instead we often tend to default to our many missions, which include defending democracy, advancing freedom of thought, and instilling the love of reading. While these deeply held values of our profession should guide our ethics and decision-making, we have a need and an obligation to measure what we can and demonstrate our impact on those in our communities who benefit from public libraries in real and significant ways. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the kinds of data that you have. So data about your library includes inputs and outputs, or data that describes library operations. So these include circulation, computer sessions, Wi-Fi usage, the number of programs offered by the library, the number of people who attended programs, library visits, and the library's registered users, just to name a few. You also have data about your library regarding outcomes and impacts, which comes from observations, surveys, and stories. You can capture, curate, and share both the numbers and the stories to tell a larger picture. You also have community data, which tells you something about the community your library serves. I'm going to quickly go through a few resources that you can access to help you deepen your understanding of your library and its place in your community, as well as data points to consider when using these resources. Next slide, please. So data about your library. These resources will allow you to explore your library's inputs and outputs, not outcomes. So indicators or questions that are formulated for the Public Library Survey that directors fill out every year for us are developed for inputs and activities to measure what resources are being used and what they're being used for. Indicators are also developed for outputs to see how much the inputs and activities are being used by the target audience. So the first resource here is the Utah State Library dataset, which is a large raw dataset, which means no analysis has been done on this data. It allows you to quickly find, sort, and filter data. But unless you love huge data sets like me, this is probably not something that you want to share with your stakeholders, but it is a good way to quickly explore and compare data points and familiarize yourself with your data. We also have the Utah State Library Public Library Survey Dashboard. This allows you to see trends within your data and to visually compare between years. You can also explore data here for other libraries in the state. Both data sets are updated annually, and they will be updated with the FY20 data this summer as soon as IMLS approves it. Next slide, please. The next resource is the IMLS Search and Compare tool. This is a web-based tool that provides an easy way to query, browse, view, and download data about individual libraries from the FY 2018 Public Library Survey. So it is a little dated, but it's not updated because of all of the analysis and work that goes into producing this resource. This is useful when you're trying to find your peer group nationally or when you're trying to compare your library directly with another library. Next slide, please. So quick little dive into logic models. Outcomes measure how much change is occurring in people or communities as a result of the outputs that we discussed earlier. Outcomes are what change as a result of having access to and using those outputs. So taking account of the number of children and parents attending a story hour would be counting an output, like program attendance. But asking parents of young children if story hour helps them read to children more frequently than before they started attending story hour is counting a desired outcome. Parents reading to their children more often is an important outcome on the road to literacy. So how can we find this data? Next slide, please. So Project Outcome is a free toolkit designed to help public libraries understand and share the impact of essential library services and programs. They provide simple surveys and an easy to use process for measuring and analyzing outcomes. This tool not only helps you define outcomes, but helps you connect them to your program goals, which is where your impact comes in, and then helps you figure out how to measure those goals. You can also use observational data, which is structured observations used to gather data about patrons' behavior, their words, and their interactions, such as how they navigate the library or a children's level of engagement during a program. Public libraries can use observation in evaluations of programming, new technology, and staff and patron interactions, as well as to gather data for space planning. Collecting qualitative data is another method. So collecting stories, thank you notes, and letters from patrons, and anyone in your community who has been impacted by your library. When you combine the qualitative data with the quantitative data, that's where the real magic happens, because that's when you're able to say something about the use of your library, but also the value of your library. Next slide, please. So understanding your community is the key to providing services and resources that will help it thrive. Having the right data to support those efforts is essential for planning strategically and engaging stakeholders and community leaders. The Census Bureau offers a lot of tools that are really helpful to meet these goals, but the three that I like the most are Census Reporter, Quick Facts, and Community Business Builder. They will all help you explore your data, find facts, visualize the data, and provide context so that you can gain a deeper understanding of your community demographics. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about some data points that can further deepen that understanding about your community. So the first is digital inclusion. So these data points include homes with broadband access, households without any type of computer, the non-English speaking population in your community, and the average internet speed measured in megabits per second. Next slide, please. So two resources that will help you access this data are Broadband Now, which allows you to look at broadband access rates and speeds at the county level and in comparison to the state and the United States overall. But it also provides a wealth of information about connectivity in your area. Policy Map provides a wide range of data that you can easily and freely layer on a map. So this can include how many households have access to the internet, low-income households, or households with children. You can download data and maps, or you can upload your own data and layer it on one of the pre-built maps on the website. Next slide, please. So some health and wellness data points to help you deepen the understanding of demographics in your community include people with a disability, the population older than 65, those who are uninsured, those with healthcare coverage, and those who are experiencing food insecurity. Next slide, please. The City Health Dashboard provides a full range of health indicators for most cities in the United States with comparisons at the state and national level. And then the county health rankings and roadmaps provides the same information, but at a county level, and also allows you to compare to other counties and geographic areas. Next, please. So economic and workforce development data points to consider are the estimated unemployment rate, people living below the poverty line, unbanked households. So that means people who don't use mainstream financial services like checking or savings accounts, the average wage in your community, and new small businesses in your community. Next slide, please. So the Economic Innovation Group has a neighborhood poverty project, which uses data points to highlight neighborhoods that are economically distressed. This is a particularly helpful resource if you have several branches. And then Data USA allows users to visualize open government data from the US Census Bureau, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the National Center for Education Statistics. Their visualizations can be used on economic and labor trends to develop better workforce programs, help job seekers, researchers, policymakers, and you to make better informed decisions through the use of visualization. Next slide, please. So education data points to consider are students attending public school, free and reduced price lunch recipients, English language learners, and special education students. Next. So the Kids Count Data Center, this data center includes access to hundreds of indicators for child well-being, including economic status, health, safety, and risk factors. And data are available by state and across states with smaller geographic breakdowns where available. And then the Common Sense Media provides digital divide maps for libraries. And this is a resource that was just created and updated within the last few months. And how the they show how the digital divide may be affecting students most in your area. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about how to use the data for advocacy. So to do this, we have to be connected with stakeholders' goals and priorities, and this includes your staff, the people who make choices about the library, patrons' needs and their preferences, and the greater community that can support the library and influence decision makers. And I hope you notice that I use the word with here and not to. Being connected with something or someone suggests a two-way flow of information and ideas. If we're connected with a friend, we share things, we help each other out, and we talk and listen. If we're connected to something, it suggests a more of a one-way flow of information and ideas, such as being connected to news sources or to the power grid. So when you're connecting with these audiences, it's really important to put in the time and effort to learn about how they communicate and what their preferences are. Do they like pictures, stories, numbers, maps, charts? Look at how they communicate their priorities to get a hint, and then you can craft and share your messaging about the library's impact on the community in their preferred formats. Next slide, please. So data should drive decisions. So once you've connected with your stakeholders and understand how they communicate, think about the following things. What job do they have? What do they know? What do they need to know? And what is your desired outcome with regards to them knowing? So some ideas of what they need to know. So for staff, this could be what they do contributes to the library's goals and reputation and to the community, which means the neighborhood and then the broader community in the city or county. They need to know broader and local trends and developments that may impact the library and the community and the work that they do, and how pieces of the library fit together, complement, and drive decisions. And then library boards, it's useful for them to know how the budget works, if the budget's on track, anything that will significantly impact the budget and why, broad and local trends and developments impacting the library, the library's contribution to the city, county, or community solutions, goals, and aspirations. And they need to know that the library is modern and important to a broad percentage of voters. Okay, I know that was a lot of information and a lot of resources, and any of those resources could and probably should have its own dedicated training session. And I would be happy to provide that for anyone who's interested. This is my job, but it's also a subject that I find fascinating and that I think is deeply important for librarians to understand and to utilize within their respective communities. So please contact me if you have any further questions or a desire to learn more about these topics. And I will turn the time over to Rachel.
Thank you, Heidi. Heidi is a data pro. She just finds answers for me that I didn't know existed. So I definitely recommend talking to her if you ever have questions or anything like that. So as Heidi said, when you combine the quantitative and the qualitative, you actually get some really powerful stories you can tell or things you can share that help to advocate the library and communicate the importance of the library. So I'm actually going to talk specifically about storytelling. And this is going to be a little bit more, I won't say interactive, but I do hope that you go through this exercise with me. Marilee, could you advance the slide, please? So this is actually taken from the ALA Advocacy Bootcamp. If you've ever heard Jamie LaRue speak, he came to both Ripple and the Director Summit a while back, but we're going to go through that again. I'm hoping your board members haven't been through this before, so I'm hoping it will be helpful. The reason we build a story in this way is it actually appeals to your brain's chemistry, and there's some great science behind it. I don't have the science on me, but basically we're going to introduce a problem, get you invested in that problem and that person being able to solve it, and then show how the library solved it, so the library kind of gets connected as that like feel good important piece of the story, and then drive it home with just one quick data point and then a good tagline. So I'm gonna actually tell you a story from the Tooele City Library that we got during the pandemic. And big thanks to Jamie Carter for passing this story along to us. If you ever have cool stories too, we love to hear them. It just like gives us the good warm fuzzies. Okay, so we're gonna give you the information on a real person, let you know the problem they're dealing with, and then how the library helped to solve that, and ultimately what that person's happy ending was. And then again, a fact about the service that helped solve the problem, and then a tagline that kind of just drives it home or that people can chew on. So, and I have changed the name of this person. Elizabeth is a resident of Tooele, and she was actually working as an Uber driver during the pandemic, but ended up losing her job because of the pandemic. And when that happened, she didn't just lose her job, she also lost the home she was renting and her car. And she was really excited because she got offered a new job and she thought, finally, my worries are gone. But she quickly realized everything had to be done remotely because their whole office was working remotely and she didn't have access to internet. So she called the Tooele City Library in desperation, just hoping maybe they'll make an exception and let her in, or is there some other way I can access your Wi-Fi just so I can do my job and get back on my feet? Luckily, the Tooele City Library had just received an LSTA grant that would allow them to extend their Wi-Fi outside of their building into a nice grassy area that's outside of the library. And so they were able to tell her, you're welcome to come and set up a chair and work all day. And so she came and she was able to get set up. She was able to connect to the Wi-Fi. And because of that, she was able to keep her job and continue to work, even though she was in a little bit of a crisis. In 2019, the Tooele Library had their Wi-Fi used 13,198 times, and their public computers were used 35,873 times. Libraries provide crucial services. So that is a true story that really happened. It just kind of illustrates to anyone you might be talking to, like, hey, this is a legitimate problem that someone's faced, and the library plugged in and was able to help her not only say yes to this job, but then maintain her work schedule even when the rest of her life was in flux. So I kind of want you all to go through the same exercise. So if you can think about maybe a patron that you know, or if you're a board member and you're not quite as like involved in the day-to-day, maybe a story you've heard from your director or someone else. So just take a minute and kind of go through these steps. And it doesn't have to be super in-depth or anything, or you could even just build up a fictional story based on a library service that you know is offered. but I want you to just take like 3 to 4 minutes to go through this and kind of craft your story. And then if some people would be willing to share out after that, that would be awesome. I will say too, when I'm talking to boards about telling these stories, I typically recommend having like 2 or 3 in your back pocket that deal with different things that might impact the person you're talking to more. So, for example, you might be talking to a young mom in the community who's going to care a lot more about like literacy and story time. So maybe you have a story about that. But if you're talking to a councilman who's very interested and engaged in the local economy and keeping unemployment low, the story I just told might be a good fit. So it's also good to kind of have a couple of those ideas floating around in your head. So go ahead and take like 2 to 3 minutes and then we'll share out. And if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, take about 1 more minute. A lot more awkward to sit in silence on Zoom than when you're all like working in a room in an actual session. Okay, we already have someone, I'm guessing it's Steve Decker, who put their story in. So he's talking about vloggers who actually traveled through Cedar City and they talked about that fast, reliable Wi-Fi and gave them an A++ rating. So like, it doesn't have to necessarily be, you know, the Dire Straits stories or things like that. Someone who might see what this influencer has to say also wants to be an influencer is gonna maybe go visit the library or talk up the library or those services. So that's another great thing to think about. You can really approach this storytelling model in any way. Is there anyone else who either wants to unmute or share in chat?
I'll share.
Thanks.
I'll share if that's okay.
That'd be great.
This is actually a combination of us and Duchesne and Uinta. Some of you might have heard it in the news, but there was a mother that took her 2 children to Fantasy Canyon in Uinta Basin and then killed them over the pandemic while she was out there in suicide. The sad thing is that this was someone that was a library patron over in Uinta, someone well known. And the mental health crisis of COVID and the struggle that has been on people. The library has, you know, at least for some of our patrons, has filled a hole for that, right? I've had lots of mothers and other community members ask, when are you going to start, you know, when can we get back together and have like our bigger story times and doing our other activities again? Sometimes that sounds rather superfluous, but it's not, especially for for these young mothers, they've made comments like, that was, it's so hard to constantly keep my young children that aren't school age programmed, and the literacy efforts, and the library helps support some of that, and it takes a burden off of me as a parent to have that program to help me along. And on top of that, it's a chance for me to visit with the other young mothers that are going through what I'm going through right now during my life stage, and to bond in that way as well. So in that regard, it's not just about reading books. There's so much happening around it that builds up a person and that helps them with so much as far as just living life, that the library as a gathering place is a heart of a community is a big deal. And for some, it's a lifeline, like we heard in that story.
Definitely. Not to put you on the spot, but do you have like a data point you could throw in about like number of people who do story time or something like that?
Yeah, 2019 is not a good example because we got
I
shut down
know.
pretty hard. But as far as Gads, I don't have it on me. That was a year ago.
Sneak it
We
up.
get
Sneak it
50,000
up.
visits to the library, but our activities, especially our larger ones, can get up to 300 people or so. The Roosevelt story time is held, and other libraries do multiple story times, but that one's held twice on Wednesday, and they can draw anywhere from 50 to 20 people per session. So pretty busy.
Yeah, that's great. So when you add that data point, you communicate, hey, this was one person, but it's not a one-off experience. In Tooele, there's 48,000 people who are using the library to access the internet in some way a year. And when you can put that number in front of them, you're gonna appease your data people, but also communicate, yeah, this was just one person, but that's just the one person who sent us a letter about it. But these experiences are happening all the time in the library, even if people aren't writing it down or filling out a survey. And look, Heidi, our data queen, already pulled the number that you had at children's programs. And then the other thing too, when you add a tagline, it kind of ruminates. So, the library is an important gathering place or something like that, where you kind of drive your point home, not quite a thesis, but a little bit, where people can, oh, okay, because you told me the story, now I know that the library is an important gathering place for young families in our community. So thank you so much, Daniel. Is there anyone else who would like to give it a try? And one thing too, like the Tooele data statistics I pulled, they're off our website, off of that annual report that your directors are having to do every year anyways. So keep that in mind. Your director is already doing this work. Heidi is compiling this work to get these numbers. So they're really, it's great to use those numbers in a way other than just putting in a report. And then it makes the report feel a little less cumbersome, at least in my opinion. So I think if no one else wants to share, I will pass it on over to Jerry. Thanks so much, everyone. Oh, wait, Angela's here. Sorry, Jerry. Okay. A young teen had been participating in our programs prior to the pandemic. She came in the library with some emotional distress and was invited to join our sketch therapy program. She returned with expressions of the peace she found through art. The library received grant funds for art kits to circulate the same, and this same teen borrows them to express herself through her art. The library has increased program attendance by 60% in the first year. The library provides connections for many. Perfect. That's a great example. You talked about this teen, you talked about her problem, what the library did to help solve it, and that she has been able to express herself and gave a number, and then also that tagline. So that's perfect. And again, you don't necessarily have to have this be like super structured or anything like that. You can kind of play with it, but when you do follow that arc, you definitely kind of played to what people expect in a story or in a movie or in a book or things like that. So thank you so much for sharing, Angela. And now I'll pass it over to Jerry.
Thanks, Rachel. Well, I really think that those two stories are a real good reason why As a library advocate, you should contact your public officials, your local public officials, your mayors, your city councilmen, your county commissioners, all of those people. They need to know this. They need to know these stories. They really do. And as a librarian and working for libraries, I am sure that you are already your own advocates, and you go out into the community, and still my theory is word of mouth is still the #1 way to communicate the effectiveness and the importance of libraries. In fact, it probably isn't a bad idea to just come up with a like 10 words or less elevator speech. Do you know how libraries transform lives? Ask these local officials, ask them if they need to, if they want to know more about how to transform lives through libraries. I mean, such great stories and those two great examples. Also, they need to know what a smart investment libraries are, like Rachel said, and they need to know why. Um, so yeah, get in touch with your local public officials. Call them, find out their contact information, email them, make sure they see your Facebook and Instagram, Twitter. They need to know what's going on, and they need to be invited. Invite them all to um, any of your events, maybe some programming. Find out if they have kids. Invite them to storytelling. I just think they need to be a crucial part of your library. I mean, they're the people who are the people who make it happen for you. So that would be my suggestion: is be informed. You must be informed. Libraries are really at the forefront of key policies, privacy, copyright, censorship, net neutrality, all of those things. I've added a link here on this slide, and that will take you to the ALA website, and they have a lot of ideas on how to advocate, and also ideas on what critical policies are up for thought and talking about right now. So that is one thing I can't stress enough, that you need to become very good friends with your local officials. It's very, very important, and that's how we roll. On the other hand, as a public employee, we do have to be more cautious about getting in touch with our legislators and our federal officials. So with that in mind, we have some very amazing folks on the Utah Library Association, and we have a group, the legislative committee, who works directly on policies and stuff like that for libraries. So we have the Day on the Hill and the Utah Library Association. That committee gets that together and works with all of the policies. And like, they're the ones who you'll want to have contact our state legislators and also our federal elected officials. There is a legislative day on the Hill in Washington, D.C. that is attended by our Utah Library Association. Generally, our Utah State librarian and the Utah Library Association president usually go once a year. It's usually in May. It's usually about this time. I don't know how they're dealing with it this year with the pandemic, but that is a definite, if you have things that you think are crucial to talk about, then contact a representative from Utah Library Association, because they are the conduit to our federal officials. The other thing is, Utah League of Cities and Towns is also a pretty good place to contact for if you have information that you want to get out about libraries. They are really good about doing that, and libraries are kind of on their scope. So yeah, absolutely get in touch with them. And Daniel Mockley just said and it's gone. I didn't read that, Daniel. he said that the advocacy committee is, oh, it's the advocacy committee, not the legislative committee. Perfect, even better. So yeah, contact them. Anyway, check out the website. It gives you actually 52 ways to advocate for your library. And it gives you some policies and situations right now that are high on the list of things that need to be dealt with at your library, all libraries. Anyway, that's all I have. So moving right along.
All right. Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you today. I'd like to just thank the State Library staff, Marilee and Heidi, Rachel, Jerry, for inviting me to join them and just to share a few quick thoughts and experiences with you guys about library boards and advocacy. So I just have a few quick items about building and maintaining relationships as an advocacy effort that I'd like to talk about today. Pretty obvious stuff, but I think it's important to talk about it. So number one, getting involved. We can act or react, right? So I've made a goal to schedule a time to go talk to the Summit County Council at least 4 times a year, besides when I have to go to them to like talk about my budget. I just want to go talk to them about something like a program we're doing, something new the library might be trying, or kind of like examples of what Rachel talked about. And I'm sure you're all doing amazing things in your communities, and your local government officials need to hear about these things. It's a great way for them to get to know you and what your mission is. And it's best if I feel if library staff and board members can attend these together and give this presentation together. I think that's really powerful. So number 2 on my list is just invite. You can go talk about these things, but it's critical that, and Jerry talked about this, invite them to actually attend these events. They might not always be able to, but when they do, it's really powerful and they get to see the impact the library is having on the community. So if you go to the next slide, Marilee, this is a picture of one of our former county council members, Kim Carson. And she is signing the declaration for the right to libraries that we all did a few years ago. Probably some of you remember that. So I went and talked to them, the council, about this beforehand and invited them personally to come. And we had an all-day event. We did a readathon in the library where somebody was reading aloud the entire time we were open. And Kim volunteered to read for her, 15 minutes or whatever it was. And she read from one of her favorite books. And of course, she signed the declaration like you see in the picture here. But I just thought that was awesome that she would take the time to come and support us and do that. And that helped build our relationship with her as a council member. Another thing I'll point out is that when you're able, I think you should try to attend ribbon cuttings, other important events that are going on in the community when you can, especially, when county council or if it's city council or what have you, if they're going to be there. It's just another way to build your relationship with them. And you can also offer to like assist with some of the projects or initiatives that they're promoting. If there's ways you think the library could help, even if it's just to spread the word about it to the community through the library's channels when that's appropriate. So if you can go to the next slide. So library board members, you often have good relationships with community leaders already. And it's really important that you speak up, let the library staff know who you know, essentially. And Summit County has a lot of small towns, and it's tough for me to get out to every single town council meeting and really get to know each member of each town council on a personal level. So I'm just going to share a quick story about one of my current board members. Her name is Joyce Housley. She lives in Hennifer, And Hennifer is a small town between Ogden and Colville. It's on the border of Summit County. It was a community that we felt we weren't reaching effectively enough. And so I was inspired by a product I saw at an ALA conference, a remote locker that would allow patrons to pick up their holds when it was convenient for them. And I really wanted to bring this to Hennifer. It's a town that doesn't have a library branch. So Joyce had a great relationship with the town council already. I did not. So she helped me get on their agenda, and she went with me to give a presentation about this idea. She introduced me to the town council members, and I guess I could have done this without Joyce, but as a respected member of the community, it was so much more powerful to have her there with me. And it showed that support. And I won't go into all the details due to time today, but the town ended up supporting our idea, and they partnered with us on a grant application that we were awarded in 2018. And they donated space that they owned to house the locker. And today we have this wonderful resource in Hennifer because of this. So if you can go to the next slide. These pictures are Joyce and I stuffing envelopes. And again, like, I would have never had this connection or this idea on my own, but Joyce happened to know the town employee responsible for sending out utility bills. And we were able to get permission to put in like a flyer about the locker that was coming soon, to let people know this would be coming to their town. And she took the time to come with me to do that. Just really cool. And it just shows, again, the power that the youth board members have. And I really encourage you to speak up, get involved, support. Don't be afraid to talk about to your library director, even if you know the spouse of somebody or whatever. Just let them know that all can be really helpful in getting things like this going. So if you can go to the next slide. This was at the ribbon cutting for the Hennifer locker. So on the left, we have Mayor Richens, the mayor of Hennifer. And in the middle, oh, that's a familiar face. That's also Kim Carson from the Summit County Council, who supported us earlier, who also attended this event. And then you have on the right, Joyce Housley from our board, who is invited to speak at this as well. So, and then the last slide is just like another picture of all of us there. Another thing, I'll just share it real quick. I think we have time, but I had gotten to know the town council and the county council over the years. And so I gave them all basically test library cards to go into that room, and all they had to do was scan the card and a locker would pop open. And getting to know them, their personalities, their interests, I was able to put like a book in each locker that would hopefully have meaning to each one of them, so they could experience the locker, but then also just kind of have that little added touch that they could hopefully envision the community like taking advantage of this and being delighted by getting something out of these lockers that they would really enjoy. So the mayor of Hennifer, Mayor Richens, he owns a trucking company and likes to listen to audiobooks. So I think I put a CJ Box one in there because I think he really likes CJ Box. And door popped open and he just said, "Hey, this is so cool." He's like, "Can I keep this card?" So I don't think he actually had a library card before this. And I'm like, "Yeah, you can keep the card." And so that is now his official library card, and he uses it. So just a couple of examples, and I hope that's helpful. I know that you're all doing great things, and just encourage you to continue to be proactive instead of reactive, and take the time to do those extra things, and it will definitely pay dividends. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you everyone for presenting. We wanted to turn the time over to our guests and see if there's any questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. So please feel free to either enter in the chat or unmute. We'd just love to hear any questions from anybody. So we'll give you till about 1:55 or so for questions. And then we wanted to give you about a 5-minute break. So feel free, you can unmute or in the chat.
I just wanted to say that I have really enjoyed it so far, and I really like the idea of the board getting involved and helping out if they need to. And Daniel's really good to kind of involve us as well. But yeah, anytime that we can help out, I think it goes a long way. So thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. I think that's so true. I think that's everyone's goal, is that we just really want people to feel involved and help people feel like they're part of this library and part of the community, and to take ownership in that. So thank you.
Thank you.
I was just thinking about an experience I had. I've been here for about 6 years, and most department heads with our county commission just go and they present their budget and they just take care of it. We decided a couple years ago that we ought to have, like Dan mentioned, the board chair at least ought to come with me to make that budget presentation together. And a comment that I got from the commission afterwards, and we got some great commissioners, was like, wow, it's nice to, meet a board member, and to hear their side of the story too, because they hear what I'm saying, but they're appointed, they're the representative of the patrons on the board, and that's really important. So I think commission members do care to hear from other people on the board and be connected in that way. And like Dan said, I don't just go for the budget. In our bylaws, actually, our library bylaws, it says that we are to give the commission an annual report, which is like 6 months later down the year, and not during crunch money time either. And so we get to report on the good things that happened. Usually the annual report has some highlights of what went well, but we also take pictures from the Facebook of events and things like that, things that the commission may not have seen because they're so busy, but we kind of compile that all in just one report, and they get to ask questions, and it's more of a happy report, right? Of like, what's going well rather than what's not going well. Cause I think the commission gets a lot of problems brought to them all the time. And if a commissioner is not involved on the board, they may not know, but if you get all 3 of them or 4 or however many you have, they can all hear it, and they can all be opened up a little bit to what is going on in the library and what the money's going to.
In the chat, we just have so true, Daniel, and councils are used to hearing what isn't going well. It's a breath of fresh air to hear positive things. Oh, Jamie, I see you have your hand up. Please feel free to go ahead.
I'm wondering, for those who are board members who are here today, I'd love to know, as a library director, I'm here in Tooele, how would you like to have things communicated to you? Do you love to have a meeting every time there are things to talk about? Do you want your meeting to be longer and have reports, or would you rather have email periodically in between those meetings? Because I think we have, as directors and staff, we're busy doing the work, and I think we could do a better job of communicating what is happening, but I'd like to know the way that that might be more helpful for you.
So our meetings have continued right through the COVID process. We've had our board meetings and done the necessary safety issues, but I think meeting together is really important because you have more of a dialogue than if it's done via email. And Daniel does keep us involved in between meetings as well if there's something that's needing to happen. So I like the face-to-face meetings. I really do.
Maybe I can ask a question of Jenny and Lorianne. They can critique me right here in front of everybody. I stole an idea from Dan Compton, and that was a consent agenda. Because people are giving up of their time to get to the board meeting, and you really just need to focus on the action items, right? But the board also needs to know of what's going on, what's gone well, or what is there something they ought to know about that doesn't need action, but they ought to be in the know. And so that's called a consent agenda, which is something I give out a week before board meeting along with the stats, so they can read that on their own time and process it. And then if they have questions, I'm happy to answer it in more detail. But has that been helpful to you, Jenny and Lorianne, as far as the happenings of the library rather than just the action items?
Yes, very, very helpful.
I really enjoyed it. I also commented over here, but yeah, it helps me feel connected to the goings on that kind of happen in between the meetings, and I really like it.
Yeah, good to know what's going on.
Great answers, everyone. I just wanted to remind you that you have about 5 minutes to take a quick break. We're going to have a panelist session next that will start at 2 o'clock. So please feel free to get a drink, just take a breather, and then make sure you're back here at 2 o'clock. And thank you, everyone, for your participation, and to our presenters. Thank you. So it's 2 o'clock. I think I'll give it one more minute so folks have a chance to get a drink of water, get situated. So we'll just give it just that one more minute, and then we'll jump into our panel session.
Marilee, are we going to be made co-host to show documents or share our screen?
Sorry, Dan, I didn't quite hear you.
It's because I keep forgetting to put my mic down. Are we being made co-host to help share our screen?
Yes, let's see, Christina. Actually, maybe I can make you co-host. Let me see.
I'm right here.
Okay, so Dan Mockley, Peter Bromberg, and Peter Bodley. Do you need me to go through those names more slowly?
Okay, Peter Bromberg, Patrick, and the two Dans,
Dan Mockley.
just Dan Mock. Okay, anyone else?
I think we're set.
Okay, perfect.
Do you guys have controls? Okay, perfect. So it is 2:02. We'll go ahead and get started, and I'm going to start just by quickly introducing our panelists today. As Associate Director of every library, the first and only 501c4 doing political work in support of libraries, Peter Bromberg provides direct consulting to libraries and library supporters on advocacy, ballot initiatives, and funding-focused campaigns. He also works nationally to provide support for state library associations and state libraries who are facing challenges related to anti-library and pro-censorship legislation. Through Bromberg Consulting, LLC, Peter offers consulting, coaching, and customized learning services across the profession. Daniel Mockley is the Duchesne County Library System Director, overseeing the Duchesne and Roosevelt branches since 2015. He earned his MLS from Emporia State University and his bachelor's in Spanish teaching from Weber State University with university and department honors. He worked in Ogden School District as a district teacher librarian 2 years and as Lincoln Elementary's librarian 1 year. He has served as a Utah Library Association board member at large, bylaws committee chair, and as the 2020-2021 president. Born in Layton, he lives in Roosevelt with his wife Emma and 3 young children. Patrick Bodley is currently the library director at the Independence Public Library in Independence, Oregon. Before that, he was lucky enough to work with Idaho's public libraries in his role as state data coordinator for the Idaho Commission for Libraries. In his free time, he enjoys exploring his new home in the Pacific Northwest, working on his ever-expanding to-be-read pile and baking sourdough bread with somewhat consistent results. So we asked our panelists today to talk about strategic planning and their process. And so first we're going to hear in this order, Peter, Dan, and then Patrick about that process. So I'm going to turn the time over now to Peter.
All right. Thank you, Marilee, and hello, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share here. And get some confirmation that that's working. Did everyone see my screen? All right, I see some heads nodding. Great. So what I'm going to be doing is setting kind of the frame a little bit about approach to strategic planning or strategic road mapping, and really talking about, you know, the world we're living in, and kind of take it from there. So not just 30,000 feet, but like 93 million feet looking down, right? And taking it from there. So hold on, now I'm not advancing my slides here. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay. So we are going to start with this question, and we can all reflect on it. What world are we living in? If we had more time, we can dive into that a little bit. But I'm going to spoil it for you and answer the question. We're living in a world that is becoming, quote, deeply weird. And I want to flesh out this phrase a little bit. It seems to really resonate with people when we use that phrase. And I got that phrase really from Michael Edson, and I'm going to share the quote here. This goes back to September 2011. So if you can try to remember where you were, who you were, what you were doing at that time, right? It's about 4 years after the iPhone launch, right? So just kind of, if you can get that moment in time. And Michael Edson was co-founder of Museum of the United Nations, UN Live, and also was the director of strategy, new media strategy at Smithsonian Institute at the time. And he said, I think that the future, even 10 or 20 years out, is going to get deeply weird. It's going to challenge us as a species in ways that we've not had to confront in our long evolution. So why? What is he looking at that he's saying 10 or 20 years out, the world's going to get deeply weird? And really, he's looking at this exponentially accelerating pace of change. And the quote goes on, that's the kind of change we're experiencing now. Exponential, fast, continuous, global in scale, accelerating in speed, and enormous in scope. So exponential change means, right, that things aren't just changing faster, but they're changing faster and faster. So if we had 100 years of change, in the last 100 years, what we're looking at now is maybe like that condensed into a much smaller time frame. And so a lot of that has to do with technology, of course, right? And he says anyone reading this has already seen more change in their lifetime of broader scope, larger scale, and faster speed than our ancestors saw in hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of years. And I think about my grandfather, who was born in Russia on the Prut River in 1908. And before he and his family emigrated to America in 1921, they had dirt floor, they had one room, a brick oven for heat and baking bread. They bathed in the river, they washed their clothes in the river, they baked bread and traded it for eggs and other things. And the first 13 years of his life were exactly the same as his father's and his grandparents and his grandparents' grandparents. Going back hundreds of years, their lives were exactly the same. And he came to America in 1921 and then saw air travel and radio and TV and satellites and space travel and right up through the internet before he passed away. So he saw more in that period of his life than generations of ancestors saw before, right? So even though this change is happening all around us, right, every day, we seem unprepared to recognize and harness and discuss and manage and shape it, right? So this is Michael Edson. Again, he's at the Smithsonian Institution. So his scale is, he's looking at, like tens of thousands, if not millions of years of human evolution and history, right, in that museum. And he says, and we're just getting started. We're just beginning to chart the surface of what will come. And so I'm jumping ahead. This quote came in 2017 from an article, Forward to the Age of Scale, right? So this idea, we're just getting started with this pace of change. So to just kind of tie this to William Gibson's quote. So William Gibson, a science fiction author, you may have heard his famous quote of, the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed, right? But he said recently, I think that when I was first reading science fiction, which would have been in the late 50s, the consensual now is 3 or 4 years long. And with 3 or 4 years of a relatively unchanging now, a writer of science fiction had the space in which to erect something. So this idea of a consensual now, where things kind of stay the same for a certain period of time. We can all agree on what reality is for some period of time before it kind of changes, right? And he says, but today now can feel like a news cycle. We have too many cards in play to casually erect believable future. So as a science fiction writer, how do you even write science fiction when 24 hours out, what we might consider science fiction is reality? Like we can't even really predict that, right? So to paraphrase Gertrude Stein, there is no now. So what does that mean for how we approach what we've considered strategic planning moving forward when there is no now? So this idea of deeply weird is that we can't see over the horizon. We can't even predict the next 24 hours. And I wish I was in a room with you all so I could see your faces when I ask you the question, does this resonate with you? This concept, if you look back over the last 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, right? can we see how this is playing out and how it's becoming harder and harder to say do a 5-year strategic plan, right? So some of the implications of this, Ray Kurzweil, who's a futurist and famous for creating some technology that helps people with visual issues to be able to read. But he wrote in 2001 that every decade our overall rate of progress is doubling. So we won't experience 100 years of progress in the 21st century. It'll be more like 20,000 years of progress. So think about what 20,000 years of progress in the 21st century means. It's hard for us to even conceive of that. But again, if we're trying to look over the next 3, 5, 10 years and plan, how do we do that when this rate of progress is doubling all the time? So to sum that up, what got us here won't get us there. In other words, our approaches, the way we do our assumptions, our culture, our organizational structures and hierarchies, our budgeting, our staffing, our skills, right? Like, I mean, so for many years we could say, well, here's your job description, and you could do that job for 20 years and that job description might not change very much. And now that's not going to work anymore. So we have to rethink all these things, and we have to ask that question of how do we deliver on our mission as a library in a deeply weird world, right? So I'm going to suggest that we need to be moving from long-range strategic planning to more of an approach that's creating a flexible framework and a strategic roadmap that which then within that we can operate and be a little bit more adaptable and flexible. So what does that look like? Well, for starters, if we're going to build a framework as opposed to a long-range plan, we really need to start with our values and our mission. So think about this. Everything around us is changing and we can't predict it. If nothing else, that's deeply stressful. Our brains and our nervous systems aren't wired for that, right? So it creates stress. But there are some things that don't change, right? And values and mission tend to be more immutable. So the values and missions, like who are we as a people, right? Let's say as a people, meaning as a library. Think about your library. Who are we, and why do we come to work every day? That's our mission. Like we're trying to make some changes in people's lives, and those are the desired outcomes. So can we describe those changes that we want to make in real people's lives, in the lives of our community, to make it more prosperous, more happy, more healthy, more interesting, more fill in the blank, right? And you fill in the blank by talking to your community members and talking to your staff. So we start with our values, and you talk about, you can have a values survey with your staff and define no matter what else changes around us, this doesn't. This is who we are. This is why we exist. Here's the outcomes we're trying to make in people's lives. And engaging experiences is like the quality of emotional quality that people have while those outcomes are being achieved. And right, so again, the values are those immutable principles by which we live and work. The outcomes are observable differences we make in people's lives. Did they learn to read? Did they grow a business? Did they, right? Are they healthier? Did they get their diabetes under control? Did they learn a new language? And the experiences are about the emotional resonances that people feel when they interact with us. So as a result of the interaction they had with the library, whether that's because they were physically present or they did a virtual program or they got an email from us, how did they feel about themselves and us? That's the quality of the experience, right? So starting with values, I'm going to show some examples from my previous position as the Salt Lake City Public Library. But we talked amongst ourselves about what are our values, what are our personal values, and what are our shared organizational values. And we synthesized and condensed those down to this. We work together to make lives better. There you go. That's why we're here, right? That's what we're doing. And no matter what else is changing, we're here to work together to make lives better. And more specifically, we're inclusive, we're open, we're curious, we're playful, we're kind. That describes us and who we are, right? And you start seeing that, people buy into it when they start just putting it up on their own walls unbidden, right? And you see that kind of out in the field. Hey, look at that. Someone put that up on their door. And we reinforce it in different ways, right? So we want to reinforce those, this is who we are. This is who we are with each other. Those outcome areas we define by talking to our community members, individual patrons, leaders of community groups and organizations across all sectors: business, faith-based, social services, education, higher education, arts and culture, government, etc. And we said, tell us about the city you want to live in, tell us what that looks like, and then we say, and here's where the library can help, right? So arts and creativity, civic engagement, critical literacies. I won't go through them all, but and so you have that conversation with your community, and they'll tell you what this is who we want to be, and these are the outcomes that we want to see. And then the library has that framework for now that we know this, what do we do in terms of our spaces, programs, services, hiring, recruitment, right? All of that. So to just kind of differentiate a little bit between an outcome and an experience, right? An outcome might be that we want to get library cards in the hands of people, right? So this is an old library card. You guys remember the metal bar where it goes ka-chunk when you check something out? So the library card, that's the outcome. We want to get them in people's hands, so they that's one outcome, right? Beyond that, we want people to use the card and check things out and learn, right? The experience, right? This is a limited edition Game of Thrones card, right? So this is like, ooh, I want one of those, right? It becomes something. It's you know, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, that it becomes something more interesting and engaging emotionally, right? So you can get a library card by walking up to a wall, and there's a computer that says library cards online application. Or you can walk up to the Meister of the City Library of House of Salt Lake special edition library card available. And there's a long line, right, of people who want to get their cards, and they come all dressed up and ready to play, and the families come together. And so that creates an experience, right? So it's not just, so now they all have library cards, but they also have this emotional connection to the library, and even to each other in the context of the library, right? So how we approach this is really very human-centered and people-centered. So keeping in mind that every choice we make, every decision we make, every discussion we have, we want to keep real people at the center. And I like to think about, if anybody walks into a library anywhere at any time or hits our website, what do I want them to experience? And then how do we reverse engineer that, right? Based on that experience we want people to have. And when we keep people at the center, we start to shift our approach a little bit, right? So there's just one example of going from the classic no food or drink sign with the circle and the thing to computers and food don't mix. Please finish eating before using computers, right? So it's just a different approach. If we're thinking about how, like, what's the outcome we want? We want to protect our computers, so we don't want food or drink here, but how do we do that in a way that is human-centered, right? That is respectful and kind and maybe a little funny, and is going to lead to the behavior that we want, but in a way that's again more human-centered than you know, trying to compel compliance with a rule. So letting go of long-range strategic planning also means kind of getting rid of this binder on the shelf approach. So if you've been through strategic planning processes, in my experience in 30 years in the business, you know, you go, it's a year, you go through all these meetings, and it's so much time and so many meetings. And then by the end, you get a binder that's this thick, right? And you're so exhausted. The binder, it's 100 pages, and it goes on a shelf, and everyone's just too tired to even look at it again, right? So this is just a contrast moving from this idea of like a binder, or that the strategic plan, right, to something smaller. So at the city library, we did like a pocket guide, field guide version of it that it literally could fit in your pocket, and that staff could look at that flexible framework and use it as a basis of conversations and individual decision making around where the time is going to go. There's also a trend towards one-page strategic plans or frameworks, and they're increasingly being called roadmaps or frameworks, right? But here's the pocket guide. There's the framework right on the back of it, right? If you want to know the outcome areas, there they are. And we've got 3 core concepts, 6 areas of focus. And it's kind of a choose your own adventure with guided questions about, like, what could you do today to create a program or a service or align a space or create a partnership in this area or that area, or how does your job connect to this or that? So we make it personal for each staff member as well to take some ownership around that. And just want to give a shout out to Rebecca Smith-Aldrich at New York Library Association, who had done this was like a roadmap to sustainability that kind of sparked my imagination for this is what a strategic plan should look like, right? Here's a Seattle Public Library, just a 1-page strategic plan, again, identifying programs of service, a business model, areas of impact. If you see over on the left, it's probably hard to see, but here's our vision, here's our mission, and here's our guiding principles, right? It's 1 page. Easy to understand. Staff can have it out in front of them, and it can guide conversations in every department. around where resources are going, time, money, et cetera, right? This is Toledo Lucas County's public library. This is probably even a little harder to read, but it's kind of like a placemat. And on the left are behavioral ground rules. This is who we are and how we are. Underlying beliefs at the bottom, strategic priorities on the right, and in the middle is kind of an artist's rendering of what does that all look like coming together. And if you had this in front of you, you could kind of zoom in and look at, what are some of the activities that are happening in this picture, right? So another shift here is from defining this plan that is like you're kind of locking you in for a few years to getting into a learning mindset and really being curious, right? Being curious about the people that we serve, being curious about our community, being curious about what changed today, right? I missed the news for a day and the world changed. But then what does that mean for the library, and how do we show up today or this week or this year, and embracing some capacity building, right? And really having to learn to learn. And what we did at the city library was we built capacity with bringing in some service design and learning some service design tools, which I'll show you in a moment. Some libraries are learning how to do facilitation. Some libraries are bringing in social workers, some libraries, but again, look at your own community and really take that learning approach and that capacity building approach. Service design is how we approach that at the city library. And really, service design has been described as structured curiosity and empathy. Excuse me. So it's a way of just looking at the people you serve and trying to understand what they need, what they want, what their aspirations are for their lives, and looking at that at the community level as well. And there's some different tools and things we won't get too much into, but storyboarding, like how do we create certain experiences or key moments, and we storyboard that out like a movie, right? So and then what has to happen to make this moment come into existence, right? Who's doing what behind the scenes, et cetera. But storyboarding is just kind of a creative way to say, if this is the experience we want to create, how do we get there? Journey mapping that's talking to your patrons and saying, tell us about the last time you're at the library, and starting to chart it out moment by moment. Those are happy faces and sad faces. So again, we're getting to the emotional reality of people's interaction with the library, and based on doing 10, 20, 50 or 100 of these journey mapping conversations, which can be done in 15 or 30 minutes, then we can start to understand where we're positively engaging with people and where there's opportunities to improve. Intercepts are just 2-minute conversations, 1-minute conversations. Someone's walking out the door. Tell me about your experience at the library today. What worked for you? What could we do better? You can do hundreds of those in a week. And again, it's just a way of, that's that structured empathy to really put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand their experience. We did intercepts at the city library, hundreds of them, and said, okay, based on people's experiences here, here's what correlated when people said they had a positive experience. It was because they felt welcomed, empowered, affirmed, they were surprised, or it was just an overall awesome experience where they felt included, they felt comfortable, safe to explore, to discover. So we created these experience principles as a way to guide us in what type of experiences we wanted to create for people. Again, not a set of rules, but a framework for staff that, again, they could put in their pocket, right? So this is a little bit about paying attention in a fundamentally different way. It's sort of more of a continual attention, continual conversations that we're having, some short, some longer, but across different people in the community as well as in our organization, that's sort of continually informing us with new data about what's happening and what are people aspiring to, what are they struggling with, what are they wanting, right? So we keep asking, what are the aspirations and needs of the patrons and the community? We keep asking, what are the outcomes and experiences we're wanting to create, and for whom? That for whom part is important. We have to understand there's different people in our communities, right? And they have different challenges and different aspirations. So we need to talk to them and understand that, and then be designing and allocating our resources accordingly, right? Alvin Toffler famously said, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And this is really about an unlearning process for us in some ways, of unlearning how to do these longer range strategic plans and learning how to just be doing these more continual conversations where we're developing these shorter term, what I would call maybe an operational plan. So, in ways, maybe it's a 3-month, 6-month, or 1 year. Here's the things that we're doing to create these outcomes in these areas for these people. And you're just kind of, it just keeps rolling on, right? You're accomplishing certain things and you're moving on to the new ones. So just some parting thoughts. This is messy, but it is structured. It's absolutely nonlinear, right? And it's definitely iterative, meaning we're trying things and we're learning from what we tried, and then we're iterating on that, and we're trying it. We're trying something new. It's a journey, and it's really a learning journey, right? But we are absolutely stepping into this unknown together, and thus, I hope I have set the clip or the framework for the rest of the conversation and questions that we'll have. So thank you. And I will turn it back to, sorry, I forgot who's emceeing.
Okay, that's
Marilee.
yeah.
Marilee, back to Marilee. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. That looks like a lot of fun. It was really great to watch your process. I'm going to turn the time over now to Dan.
Well, thank you very much. Peter, I love listening to Peter. I admire Peter greatly. You can tell why he's our advocacy chair, right? We were just talking about advocacy committee earlier. This is the man, and he's the guy you want going to the legislators, right? So we're so happy to have him, and Peter's been so phenomenal in Salt Lake City Public Library. I am far away from him in the donut, which some of you are from, of rural libraries surrounding the urban Wasatch Front. Our strategic plan, he hit on most of the main points. I guess I can only add to it a little bit. There's a book that we were given at our Public Library Director Summit called Expect More. This is backwards. I'm so sorry, but it's by R. David Links. And there was a couple of things that the thoughts that stuck out to me the most when we did our strategic plan in our rural community were these things. I'll read them. Bad libraries only build collections. Good libraries build services. Great libraries build communities. And Peter already has jogged that really well. To give our context, we did have a strategic plan, but it was based on, guess which one of those three? It was collections. And that was our library's goal when I arrived as library director. I really appreciated the training that the state library gave, and they're the ones that gave us these books. It really helped me refocus with our board and say, is that what we're all about? We're just about our collection. Certainly there's a lot of work that goes into that, but what are our services and what are we doing for our community? Libraries should be about knowledge, not tools. And there's an idea of library of the people, not for the people. That's a very almost arrogant thing to say, is like, we are the library for the people, and just having us in your community will make you better. But if we're not engaging with our community, if we're not trying to help build them up, no matter what format the knowledge or information is in, then we've got an issue. Let people contribute and have a voice. Peter gave some great examples there. And certainly getting their requests for information is important, but also people sometimes come to me and say, hey, it'd be great if you could do this program on such and such and such. So I'm like, that would be amazing. Are you an expert in that? Can you help us with that? And sometimes they've said, well, yeah, I could help a little bit with the program, because you know that the library staff is super strapped on time and we don't know everything. I'm sorry, I know I shattered everything with that comment, but we don't, and we need other experts to come and help us out with those kind of services. So if patrons are willing to help contribute to that knowledge base in the library, that's phenomenal. And that can help other patrons, let them create knowledge, not just access and consume knowledge, but also to create it. Those are some thoughts from this book. A parting thought on that: libraries must be of the people, not for them. When a member of the community walks into a library or clicks into it, even nowadays, he or she must see an opportunity to contribute, to have a voice, and to improve the institution. Otherwise, the library is just another Borders or Blockbuster Video, and we all know what happened to Blockbuster Video. So something to keep in mind about where we're headed. I am not perfect at implementing this, but we're trying. So, Peter gave a lot of big picture. This is our little picture of 10 pages. It is mostly narrative, but I also have a table, which seems to be the tool that was of interest most to the state library. But most of our work on our strategic plan was the mission and the vision, right? We recrafted it away from collections and tried to get it moving towards community. And, I have 3 board members here participating, and I appreciate their input. Our mission that we're striving for right now is to enrich our residents' knowledge and inspire their growth. I don't care if they're borrowing the collection. I mean, it does matter. But if we're inspiring their growth in any other way, that discussion we had earlier about story time, mothers connecting with other mothers, kids connecting with kids, that is growth. Some of it's emotional, mentor, whatever. That's what we're about. If we can facilitate that and help them, and in turn, hopefully they empower and strengthen each other and unite their communities. One of the best things about being in a library is that you can get everyone together in the community. We are really separated, I think, especially in this state, by many boundaries: religious, ideologic, race, all that kind of thing. But in the library, we just don't care. We're all a community. Let's come together and have some discussion. And that's a beautiful thing. That is a kind of a nebulous mission. I get it, but I also wanted to keep that open for my staff so that they didn't feel like that this is the only thing we can do. I really want to say, does it fall in that nebulous mission? Great. Then we should at least investigate it and see if it should be something we ought to be doing. Some of the core values point more directly towards it. We provide needed information, resources, and experiences. Like Peter mentioned, experience is critical. Gather the community and build bridges across diverse groups. Promote patron input on materials, programs, and services, including sharing their expertise in the library, and promote staff learning and innovation to continually provide improving service. We don't know everything. 24 hours news cycle, just like Peter mentioned. These are some of our focus areas and values that go on there. But if you're looking for the first time crafting a plan, there is an introduction which the State Library gives some guidance on. But we came up with 6 kind of areas of goals that, what does this actually mean for us, at least for now, for the next 3 years, and then we'll look at it again together, and get community input if we can. A community hub of opportunity. Your library that's the theme of the conference in ULA. We are the heart, and there's other organizations that are part of that too, but we certainly can be a beating heart, whether it's in a school or the university, wherever. So how can we help facilitate that? Outreach and awareness. We've focused on reaching out to our communities. Dan Compton gave you a great example in Hennifer. I can't afford a locker like that. He got a great grant for it. But we have 2 branches separated by 30 miles. And then I have a couple of towns that are 20 plus miles away from both branches. We have a large county that we're covering. And I only have so much budget. And I know I can't build libraries in all these places, but we do go out there and have some offsite programming and offsite library service. Just last week, I went up to Tabiona in the Uinta Mountains, and a book club said, hey, can you come and show us how to access your electronic materials? And we had a great visit, and they felt really, they were just so welcoming, because they're paying the tax too, but their library is 30 miles away. But to have a library employee come out and spend the time with them to show them things, they were really impressed, and I enjoyed it too. That's what the job's all about. Ours is a little unique in that we have regional history. We do have a little bit of a history collection because no one else is keeping it in our county. And if we don't, it will get taken by someone else who will, away from our county, likely. So this is not something you would have to do, but we're taking that one on of trying to at least collect some of that stuff. Lifelong learning is a big key. That includes our electronic collections and any other effort to help anyone keep learning throughout life. We are looking to build a branch, which we'll discuss later. And then accessibility to technology is one goal that the State Library asks all of you to put into your plans as part of certification, at least for right now. But that just makes sense, right? How are we continually looking forward in technology? And then the rest of the pages kind of go into more detail, which I won't bring up because it's not your library. But let's make a quick jump to this table. This has been helpful for me, for my board, and for our staff. And simple idea, you can modify this easily, but we made some goals of like, how could we put this in practice for real? And so each area has some goals, and each year we'd update it. you will see that I have yellow and red scattered throughout. Some things just did not come out like we hoped, but a lot of green did. And it was wonderful to say, hey, we did get that done. Yellow isn't a failure, but it's something we're still working on, and it just hasn't gotten completed yet. I would, there were some things that we just couldn't get done. For example, we wanted to partner with our Ute Tribe library that's near us. They aren't part of our jurisdiction, and that librarian gave her heart there. I really appreciate Cheryl Lonebear. Unfortunately, management made a different decision there, and then that kind of ruined that goal for us too, but it was still an important effort for us. That's just one example, but hopefully there are things that you can control. These are outcome based. It isn't as much about how people are feeling, but I could have done a better job on that. I could have probably encouraged to get more stories, pay attention to how are people being affected to Wi-Fi in the parking lot, how are people reflecting on their experiences, that kind of thing. But this is just one idea of a strategic plan. It's not perfect. We didn't hire a moderator, and they are very helpful in helping you get out of your tunnel vision of what is possible, right? They help a lot of people dream more broadly and bring in things that maybe they hadn't thought about before. But if you're looking for a starting point, maybe this isn't a bad spot to start. The table was helpful. This is what gets the most attention rather than the narrative, but the narrative gives all the context. So that's just my example. And I think I'll turn the time over to Marilee and Patrick.
Thank you, Dan. And I liked how you pointed that out, that, you know, you do what you can. And I would say, don't be so hard on yourself. Not everything you're going to try out is going to work, you know?
No.
So try, but making efforts and then learning from them is really powerful. So I think anybody can relate to that.
Well, and one thing I forgot, I really forgot. If ask your library directors to share their plan with one of their other colleagues. I drafted that up, and then we shared it with Uinta, with Sam Passy. He is a phenomenal thinker, and someone that's kind of close to our situation of libraries in rural setting. And so he pointed out things and added some language that I was like, oh man, that's perfect. Thank you for looking. And so have someone peer review it too. That can be really helpful.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Patrick, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Marilee. Everyone can hear me okay? There's thumbs up. Thank you very, very much. That's what we want. Let's get this shared right here then. So hopefully everyone's seen a 4 stages of strategic planning picture right there. Just kind of a little bit of background that we didn't go too far back in my history, but I am a Utah boy. I got my start in Utah libraries. I see familiar names scattered throughout this. I worked with Flora at USU. That was my very first library job. After that, I was lucky enough to be hired and actually started down in Richfield. I was a library director down there, and then went to Idaho and now here. I say that to kind of mention I'm looking more at the small side of things, even compared to Daniel's system. Currently, the library I'm in is about half that size of legal service area population. And Richfield, when I was there, was about 7,500, 8,000 there. So I'm looking small, and not so much today. I didn't really want to talk about what my plan was, but more the process of planning. Like Peter mentioned, there's different, you can have a binder, you can have a 1-page, you can have a little booklet, and I'm here to tell you that that doesn't matter. I think that's why Marilee asked me to talk, is because it doesn't matter how it ends up looking, but just keeping the stages of strategic planning in mind. It is that cycle, but it consists of those 4 main phases in your cycle of preparing to write or renew or evaluate your plan, writing the plan, implementing, and evaluating. So we're going to start by talking, we'll go through each stage, but to start with just the preparation. First, what you need to do is gather up all the information that you already have. So if you have a current plan, or even the most current plan, if it's 7, 10, 13 years out of date, gather up what you do have, or do you even know where it is? So find where that plan is and bring it to it. Bring it along, read it, and know. Do you have an updated mission and vision statement, or do they need to be updated? And or do you have a 2020 vision now that it's 2021? That's probably not so good for you. So make sure that you're up to date with the things that you're going forward to. One of the things that has worked for me in the past is, especially in my position now, is to establish a working group for strategic planning. So since 2020 wasn't difficult enough, I decided to level up and move across 2 states with my family in the middle of the pandemic. And when I got on board, searched for the strategic plan that the prior director had left behind, and the date on that was 2013. So I knew that we had some place to go, but also I'm not from Oregon. I've been to the coast a few times before we moved here. It's been great. I did not know the community. I didn't know the region. I didn't really know the people. Obviously, in the middle of the pandemic, everything shut down. So what we did, and what I've done with other libraries in the past, is establish the strategic planning working group. Every community has those people who they want to partner with, or who should be partnered with the library. Everyone from the Lions and the Elks Club to the school district to, local schools, every organization that you can possibly think of. Do you have Friends of the Library? Do you have a foundation? Is there in our community, there's a homeschool mom group. So everyone that you can think of. And what we did is we decided, okay, this time it was virtual, but we were going to set up a meeting to say, this is our mission and our vision, and this is where we think we need to go, but where do you think we need to go? We got all of their feedback for what they wanted to see happen in the next 3 to 5 years by being very upfront and saying everything you say is valid, but everything you say is not going to happen. We're just here brainstorming and getting ideas there. We took all of their stuff, all of their suggestions, and then sat down as staff, as a board, and said, okay, what's realistic? Where do we want to go? Where do we want to head? And took those suggestions from the strategic planning working group to go forward that way. So people obviously feel more buy-in if they have that ownership stake of, hey, this is where the library is headed because of what we said. And being new to town, even if I wasn't, that is a way that we could get that buy-in from outside sources. So you'll also want to set goals that align with your library mission, as well as objectives and activities that contribute to those. So that's taking the necessary information that you have going forward. So the way that I see and view a strategic plan is kind of top down. It could be bottom up, whatever, but the mission and vision is everything is going to flow from that mission and vision. Goals are going to relate to the mission and vision. Objectives help you achieve the goals. Activities lead to accomplishing those objectives. And you can tie a big old bow around it by measuring those outcomes. Now, just real quick, I did want to give a quick note on language. My very first strategic planning course that I sat through was actually put on by the Utah State Library. They came down to Snow College in Richfield. And so hopefully I'm doing them proud, but also just because that is the way that I've learned it and I've got it in my mind. That's the way that I'm presenting it today. But if you consider vision to be more broad than the mission, or vice versa, or your goals lead to the activities, activities lead to goals, just like how you write the plan doesn't matter, what you call a thing doesn't matter. What really matters is the way that you're going for it. So if you like to think of your objectives as being long-term and your goals being shorter term, that's great. But just so that we're all on the same page, that's kind of what I've got going on in my mind. So you've updated your mission and your vision statement. This is the first thing. And then keep in mind that your mission and vision statements should absolutely 100% be aspirational. right? Another way to look at it is, why do you exist? Why is the library there? How is the world better off because of what you do? To create that useful mission statement, it has to be realistic and achievable. What is the library's mission today? Now, is it different now than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or does your community and your mission have a standard mission that's always been the way that it is? Is that your core? It's up to you to decide. You know your community, you know your libraries, but think about whether this mission describes who your library is or if it needs to be updated. Your mission statement doesn't include an assumption, like Peter was talking, we don't know the future. And the vision statement doesn't include any assumption that you have a total understanding of the future, because whatever it looks like tomorrow or next year, your vision is what you want the library to become. So you have to have somewhere to go. That's what that vision is. Working to overcome or capitalize on the reality of future conditions, that's going to be a part of the strategy that you've got. What you want your library's future to be is an important decision, but the questions of the future shouldn't constrain that vision, right? So all of us know those descriptive words, those adjectives. That's where we're going to use those descriptive words as we describe how much better the world's going to look now that we're done changing it. And then once you've got your mission and your vision, whether you've pulled them out of what you've already had or you've rewritten them, let the public know. Make a poster, put it on some handouts on your tote bags, stencil it to the wall, whatever. Let people know what it is that you are striving to achieve and why you are there. So now that you've got all the feedback that you want, it's time to put pen to paper or fingers to keys or ink to quill. And now you got to write it down. There isn't, like we talked about, there's not a form to write your plan up. It's all about how it makes sense to you and your organization and your library. You could have that single page document. You could have, if you write though, if you and your organization and follow those steps and love those binders of step-by-steps, please use what works for you, right? If you are the kind of person who likes to diagram your notes clear like we did back in middle school, and that's how you're going to flow through, it's much more important that you have something that you can follow and you will understand and do something with than to have something that looks nice. You can have both, but make sure that you're following something that you can understand and will follow. So our next little section there, the goals, objectives, and activities. We have our mission and vision statements taken care of. So now we need to outline those goals. And the process for that is really, really easy. Your goals are going to lead to the objectives, which are going to lead to the activities. Goals should tie directly to your mission statement. So for example, if you and your library decide you have a threefold mission statement of early literacy, supporting lifelong learning, and then entertainment, let's say, then you could structure your plan to have three main goals, one that's going to fit each section of that mission statement. And then you're going to write your objectives to meet those goals and your activities to meet those objectives. So your goals, you would say, all right, we're going to reach this in 3 to 5 years. Our objectives, we're going to hit every year to meet that section of the goal. Activities are what we're going to be doing every week or month or whatever. Keep in mind, and we'll talk about it briefly, but you are going to need to know how you can evaluate those activities, not just that you're doing them, but how well you're doing them as well, as you do that along the way. Keep it in mind that diagram, goals versus objectives, and my conversation earlier about how language doesn't really matter, but it does just for today. Goals are going to describe the that desired outcome that support your mission and vision, and they're more long-term. And for me, for today, objectives are those shorter term things that we're going there. This is where, if you've heard of SMART goals or SMART objectives, in this case, objectives are your SMART things. They're the things that are specific, so limited to one aspect of that goal. They're measurable so that you're able to know when they've been achieved. They're achievable, which means it's something you can actually do. They're relevant, which means it is something that actually goes towards achieving that goal. And they're timely, so you have a way that you can look at saying when this has been done. You'll be able to know when that's been taken care of. So SMART, in this case, objectives, not SMART goals, but those objectives are the things that you want to be SMART. Then you have that plan, you've got your binder or your one-page document, but if you don't put it on the wall, if you don't actually pull it off of the shelf, it's going to do nothing. So you have to actually put your new plan into action. And for that, there's really just 3 A's that you need to remember. First, allocate or reallocate all your resources that are required to implement your plan. We all know that every library runs on stuff. We run on staff, we run on time, we run on money. Now, if you got a nice new grant for 5 years that's going to fund all the new stuff, congratulations, allocate that new money. If you didn't get that nice new grant, then you need to reallocate the funds that you've got or that you're used to getting to go ahead and take those next steps with your new strategic plan or with your new goals, your new activities. Second, you need to advertise to everyone, but especially to that planning group. If you used a strategic planning group, let them know when you are done and when you're good to go. Let everyone who was a part of the process along the way understand that their buy-in has an effect and that their buy-in has now created where you are going, where your roadmap is going to be. And of course, you need to act. You have a plan, you have goals and objectives and activities, so go and do those activities. And I would be remiss if my last role as state data coordinator, I can rarely talk about anything without talking about the statistics or measuring the evaluation behind it. So just real quick, evaluating your plan. Those measures and outcomes, they're a key part of that strategic plan after all. How are you going to be able to achieve, or how are you going to be able to tell that you've achieved anything if you can't lay out what success is going to look like to you? Now, I'm not saying that you have to come up with a big metric or a nice, spreadsheet. They're great and I love them, but that's not the case for everything. The best advice I ever heard, though, the CEO, the current CEO at Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, I think he's been there for a month now, used to be the executive director and chief librarian at Seattle Public Library, Marcellus Turner. He came to Idaho when we held a futures camp there and I was working there, and he laid out his keys for evaluation, and I have loved them and share them with everyone every chance that I ever can. All you have to do to evaluate your libraries is know, what did you do? How well did you do it? And is anyone better off because of what you did? That's it. Now, how you figure those out, we do surveys, we track attendance, we ask all the things that everyone knows that we're doing. But that's what we're trying to figure out. What did you do? How well did you do it? And is anyone better off because of what you did? I'm sure Utah Library Association, Public Library Association can get you in touch with your state data coordinator, get you in touch with Project Outcome, go through all the different trainings and sessions on measuring those things. But that's what we're trying to figure out. And if they won't, or if you're scared, please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk to people about that. But that is our cycle: preparing, writing, implementing, and evaluating. And let's go forth and do. That's what we've got, and that's what's worked for me.
Thank you, Patrick. It was so great to hear from 3 pretty different perspectives. Really quick, are there any questions? Just kind of about what our speakers have talked about so far. And I'll just wait a minute or so. And I think at 2:55 we'll take a 10-minute break. So we'll go 2:55 to 3:05. I just wanted to make sure that people had a chance to ask something right away. Something was pressing.
Jamie's got her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Jamie, I didn't see your hand. Please go ahead. Oh, Jamie, you're muted. Am I the only one not hearing her?
But it doesn't say she's muted. That's weird.
Are you there?
There it is.
I just have all the ways to mute myself. There's my like first and second degree, like don't interrupt people because I'm terrible at taking the talking stick. My question for you guys is there a particular amount of time that you sort of know, this is a long-term process. It's going to take us 3 months. What's your expectation of yourself and your organization when you get started to have something that's actionable toward the end? Because each are so different. That would be awesome to know.
Well, I'll take the talking stick. And I'm not sure how much time. I'm guessing I'm estimating it was 6 to 9 months. But again, we were taking a very different approach, and part of it involved bringing in someone to teach us service design. So part of it was that skills building. But if you're talking, and also, how many different community groups and members of the community, I mean, I think it's scalable, but I think to do this in less than 6 months is a disservice, because you really want it to be informed by conversations that you're having with a real good cross-section of patrons, non-patrons, community leaders, staff. Again, you're really trying to understand in a deep and a broad way, not Broadway like Broadway, like Broadway. What are the aspirations, needs of the community? Who do we want to be as a community? Who do we want to be as a town or a city? And really taking the time to understand that. So I'd say 6 months at minimum, and it could be longer. But then in my model, then that's just to get the train out of the station, and then you're creating sort of an ongoing cycle where now that you have those skills, you're having these conversations as just a matter of course. You're always doing intercepts. You're continually kind of refreshing that data stream of bringing people in either formally or informally for those conversations, and updating the activities. And I didn't get into some of the things that Dan showed and Patrick had showed in terms of here's now the specifics of what we're doing. That in my mind was kind of separated out into what I might call an operational plan. So our strategic roadmap process was really that stage 1, and stage 2 was now we need to put flesh on the bones of that. Right now we need to have those conversations as an organization of, so what are we actually going to do? But I kind of separated that out from what I would call that initial roadmap process.
If I can follow up about Peter's comment, I think Peter's makes sense for his system. Peter, how many branches did you have in Salt Lake?
8.
8. That's a lot in a big urban setting, right? Whereas I've got 2 that are serving a smaller community. I think when you have that kind of Peter was overseeing some really phenomenal branch managers that know what they're doing and are going to put the flesh on the bones. He's got to think big picture of like, okay, here's where we're all headed now. I respect your autonomy. I respect your expertise and well, at least I'm thinking this, your branch managers, and you guys know what's going to work for your communities, but build it around the skeleton we've given you. Whereas mine is more like, my staff's like, okay, we need the flesh now. So it's like, okay. So mine was crafted in a little different way in that regard, but I think they both are appropriate for the amount of responsibility that needed to occur in both cases. But I second what Peter said about 6 months. We knew our strategic plan was due in 2021. We started working on it in the summer of this last year and started gathering input. It took even longer with the plan before that, when we were recrafting mission and vision, because then it was like a whole different, before we even talk about goals, let's talk about pure mission. And that took 2 or 3 months to really discuss with the staff and gather ideas and where we really headed. So even longer if you're going to go that route.
Yeah, just to, I guess, tack onto that, 6 is good. Understanding scale to size, right? So if you're a 1-person library and you're getting buy-in from you, right? You don't need to set up meetings with yourself. But if you are working, and getting those outside groups and everything, a lot of your time is going to be those weeks between meetings. There's still background work that you can do. And obviously it's going to start small and then really speed up once you get to writing and implementing there. But 6-ish months, it took us 9 to write this one here. But the first 3 months were me trying to sit down with the board and actually meet with them. So about that.
That's really great. It's interesting to hear that from big to small, there's a kind of a standard timeline there. So thank you all for answering. Any other questions? I did want to give people that 10-minute break. So feel free to turn off your cameras, mute, go get a drink of water. And then our panelists are going to come back. We have a few questions for them. And that will conclude our final hour. So please feel free, folks, to take that 10-minute break. 3:10. So I'm just going to gather people back together. If our panelists are there, they can turn on their cameras. Great. It looks like we're all here. And I'm going to go ahead and just jump right into our questions. We have 3 questions. And this first one, we're going to go in the following order: Dan, Patrick, and then Peter. The question is, how do you start with the goals for building a new library or expanding it? And the person who wrote in the question said, we are at the point of running out of room, probably in the next 2 years or sooner. And so that's their perspective. And Dan, what thoughts do you have on that?
Some thoughts. Okay, we're good now. Sorry about that. Wrote some thoughts ahead of time. We right now are in the process of, we're in a 4,400 square foot facility in Roosevelt. We're gunning for a 16,700 square foot facility. And it's been quite a process. It's been like 3 years in the making just to get to the point of getting a contract signed for a prime contractor. And wouldn't you know it, we picked the best time ever to build a library at record high construction material prices, but it is what it is, you know. I think some of the goals is where we started is, what is the perception of the board and the staff, the public of the library facility and how it's meeting service needs? Are they satisfied, or do they desire something more? If they're not sold on it, you're not going to get very far. So that's critical. Hopefully it's part of your strategic plan. We toured a lot of libraries. I toured about a dozen. We could have done more, but it is a bit of a drive for us. We looked for libraries that were going to be similar in size to what we were kind of hoping for. I went to Grand County in Moab, visited Harriman in Salt Lake, Springville, and lots of others. And during those tours, the director would go with me, and it was so great to talk with them because they would tell you the good and the bad. They're like, we really love this. This stunk. Or here's our server room and the guys ran pipes right over it. And if we ever have a flood, we're toast, you know, things like that that you wouldn't see on the surface, but going through with the director was really great. Took tons of pictures. I have folders full of them. And I use some of those pictures to gather the really great stuff in particular to share with the public, to get their ideas going, and also to help my board and local stakeholders, local officials, to kind of catch a vision of like, here's what you have. Because in my rural area, they only have seen what we've ever had unless they've toured other libraries themselves. But the public at large, at least in my community, has only had what we've had for 30 years. They need their vision expanded, and the tours really helped with that. Budgets don't always allow you to see everything in other libraries. So thinking of scalability, taking even a piece out of the Salt Lake Library that we saw, Harriman had a great floor plan design where you could really, the staff could see really what was going on everywhere. And to keep our operations and maintenance down on the building after it's done, that was critical. And so I took a lot of pictures of that because it's that long-term cost after it's built that's going to kill you over time. So that was a really big thing. Once we had those things gathered, we did a feasibility study. And that is when you pay an architect to kind of just estimate how much it would even be to make this thing happen. They don't do a full out schematic design, but they can take main ideas, can kind of look at the piece of land you're thinking about and give you at least a rough floor plan. That was really key when we went to our public meetings with afterwards. We had a couple of public meetings to present ideas. We specifically contacted local community stakeholders like the USU campus out here, various city council members, the mayor, the local school principals and other administrations. We just let everyone know, we're like, hey, we're interested to hear your ideas and what your needs are. And then of course, library users and non-users in general. And it was very positive. They were wondering, should we remodel or should we build new? And it didn't take long when they saw both designs and even kind of looked at the cost, like, let's just do new. It's going to be so much better if we did new. I hardly had to sell it to them because the feasibility sold it for me. And it was a very positive reception. and it helped us move forward. We had 2 public meetings based around that, and then we were able to start approaching for funding and architects. Funding is a big part of that. We're in a unique situation where we're a mineral producing county, that we have some access to a fund called the Permanent Community Impact Board. That's not available across the state. But there are other options: an election bond, a truth and taxation increase. Peter did a great job with that in Salt Lake, where they sold why they were doing it. And they've done a phenomenal job with it since they've gotten the tax increase. Sometimes you might be able to get a donation. It's not very good right now. Other donations or other governmental sources probably will be a mix. All things to look at. And then after we had all those things in line, before we could approach these funding boards, we really needed to have an architect moving forward with the schematic design. Once we knew what the people wanted, then we did a request for qualifications in our case, because we didn't have a design fleshed out yet. We needed to say, hey, we need your ideas on this. This is kind of look at the feasibility study, but we don't know what it will exactly be beyond that. We need to talk about this. They were phenomenal. We had 12 applications for it, and the library board helped whittle that down, in-person interviews, all that jazz. And some things we looked out for in those, we're looking for similar size projects and how their budget came out on them. And then, you can call up their references and whatnot. If they were so far out of our league that we couldn't afford them, we really couldn't consider them. Or in talking with other directors in private, I found out that certain firms weren't working out very well. And you found out some of the stories of like, I wouldn't hire these guys again, and we didn't say anything about that publicly, but it kind of helped us also make a decision in that regard, that we've heard some things that we may not want to go down that route. And that's the stage we're at now, because then we gave the schematic design with a more fleshed out floor plan to the funding boards, and then they were able to approve it with good colors. That's not common. Usually it's water and roads, which is critical. But having my commissioner sold on it, he practically defended it to the whole funding board. I was there, some board members were there, and they knew we had done our homework. Tons of public minutes were critical. Public support was there. They just knew that this needed to happen, and it wasn't just me asking for a nice building for my staff and me. So those are some of the first steps I had. Sorry that took so long.
I'm not sorry. You should keep going. No, that was great. I'm kind of like Daniel. I wrote down just a couple of notes when I saw this question before. First key to me is always have your wish list going, because there's always things that we want when you hear about this cool thing that another library's got going, that you hear about all those things, because you never know. Maybe you're going to move to Oregon, and maybe 2 months onto the job, the city manager is going to come to you and say, hey, we're applying to this giant grant with our congressman, and we need you to fill out about $1 million wish list for the library. Still waiting to hear whether we got that, but I had the wish list. So always have your wish list, and you'll know what you can go for. And then every year at budget hearing, I jotted down, always ask for more, because if you're constantly letting people know we need more space, we need more, then it's not a surprise when you go to these things that we've been asking this for forever. One thing Daniel mentioned that I really, really like is asking other libraries how they did it. Your friends or neighbors have recently expanded, or they've built a new building. Who knows more how to do it than someone who's recently done it, right? If you're going to go talk to someone who expanded and built their new building in 1997, that's great, and the process may be the same, but things have definitely changed there. One thing that I will say that I was really surprised is the success. It got community buy-in for this building project, as well as others. There's a little town in Idaho called Manan, which, unless you've been there, you don't accidentally get to Manan. You have to go there. But they were gifted some land when I was there, and their current library is like a outbuilding of a school trailer sized trailer. where they're at. So they finally had land and they had places where they were going to go, but they had no idea what to do for plans or what they liked. And so what they did was something that I can see working across the country. They reached out to BYU Idaho, was the closest college to them, to the architecture and design school, the program there. And they met with a professor and they said, hey, we'd like just some plans of a library. And so what this professor did was he made it a final project for his class, was to design a library. So the librarian and the board chair went and talked to the class. This is the square footage we have. This is the things that we need. This is, you know, all of the facilities. We sat down, they came up with the square foot planning for, you know, we need X amount for children's and this much for YA and this much of staff. And then we need our restrooms and everything. And they laid that out to the kids. And then at the end of the semester, they got together in the park, had it catered, did a little fundraiser that way as well, where all of the kids got to come with their 27 different designs for a brand new library in Manan. And the public got to see them and vote on what they liked and didn't like, with little post-it notes that they put everywhere on all the plans. This is what I like. This would be really cool. We maybe shouldn't do that. So they had this way, they had to pay nothing. Now, obviously they're gonna have to take those plans, or they did take those plans to an actual architect and say, hey, we'd like to kind of go and steer this and take this from one of the others, but they weren't starting from ground zero anymore because they had that done for them. So reach out to school. I know there are schools in Utah and there are more than enough people willing to help out. Reach out to your other libraries.
That's great. I think actually UVU did something similar for Vineyard. I could be wrong, but I like the community involvement there. That's exactly what we're looking for. So Peter.
Yeah. I'll say ditto and so I tried to get this in sort of sequenced because I completely rewrote all my notes while Patrick and Daniel were talking. So, okay, as a principal, right, we don't want people in the community to first think of the library because we're asking them for something, right? We don't want that. Like if they haven't thought of the library, if they haven't been using the library, even if they have been using it, but they really haven't been thinking about support, we don't want them to first think about us because we've got our hand out saying we need money for fill in the blank, right? Which means if you've seen the movie Glenn Ross, right? There's the about salesman. So ABC, always be closing. And I think about that as like always be advocating, or if you want to use ABC, always be connecting, right? So that the work for building support begins, if it's not already happening, like today. And one of the things that just I was doing while I was director was having an ongoing series of what I called director's breakfasts, even though sometimes they were lunch. But I would serve food, good food, and invite 20 or 30 people from different groups. So it might be women leaders, it might be arts, it might be social services, elected officials, the media. And it was me just doing like a little bit of a 15, 20-minute dog and pony show. And I had just slides that were, it was very visual and ended with a little 1.5-minute video. But it was really all about blowing people's minds of what's really happening at the library, because especially if people aren't going to the library, or even if they are, they might be going because they're bringing their kid or they're going for, but to show them what we're doing with entrepreneurs, with workforce, with culture, with teaching robotics, with STEM, with what, you know, so it's really like within 15 or 20 minutes showing the whole range of it. And just watching people's eyes go like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And just building that out kind of strategically by inviting, you know, partners and community leaders, and just doing that just once a month, just having, so that's part of it, inviting your elected officials in, right? Like when Dan said that his commissioner was selling the plan, so that's the sign that you've done it right? When you can step back, and whether it's your commissioner, your mayor, or a formal or informal community leaders are saying, let me tell you why I support the library and why you should too. That's where you want to be, right? It's not that we're selling it. It's that people who are already believers and feel like they're a part of it because we've invited them in and helped them to feel a part of it, they're stepping forward. So that's just kind of building that into what we're doing all the time, right? The other thing is as we're talking about, say, a new building or starting to plant that seed and have those conversations, at every library, we talk about having plan A and plan B. Plan A is if you give us the money, right, then this is the benefit to you and your family and your neighbors in the community. So this is how a new building will positively impact you and people you care about. And if you don't give us the new building or we don't get the money, then this is the negative impact. It might mean that we don't have enough space, we don't have enough parking, we don't have enough whatever. But we're either solving problems for people or we're extending success. Those are like the two categories. So we're talking about that, right? Here's the benefit, here's the problems we're solving for you and your life and your community, for your neighbors, for your family, or here's how we're extending some success that already exists. As far as the public engagement, like Patrick was talking about, the having the pictures and having people vote. I strongly support that. And what even add, you don't need pictures necessarily just of libraries, but the great thing about pictures and asking people to vote on that is it transcends language. It also transcends age, right? A 3-year-old can put a green dot next to a picture of like, oh, that looks like something he'd like or she'd like, right? So getting that public engagement and formally or informally, but because you can do like a real formal master facilities planning process, or I think Daniel mentioned the a feasibility study. When I was at Salt Lake City, we did a space utilization plan, which was I think similar to what he would describe as the feasibility study. So it wasn't a full out plan. And then that grew into a few years later into a more of a formal master facilities plan, which is almost a strategic plan in and of itself, but really focused on the spaces. So that that means there's a lot of public engagement that's required, right? And the more engagement you have, the more people feel like they understand and have been participatory in it, right? What's that saying? People own what they help to create. So you want to get to that place where I'm not selling, or we're not selling you something that the library is asking for. Is we've engaged with you and we've done that time and done that work so that you understand you're a part of this, and you're going to be selling it to your friends and neighbors, right? On our behalf, right? So I think in one way or another, I covered everything that was scribbled hastily down on my sheet there. So
That's great. Thank you so much, everybody. So we'll go on to our next question, and we'll go in this order: Patrick, Peter, and then Dan. And the question is, how are ways to effectively engage very conservative board members and local government officials in a meaningful way to build support for the public library's mission? Patrick.
Yeah, so the short answer is the same way you would engage very liberal, very moderate, very whatever. You're going to engage people on their level. The best way they can describe it is, in reality, there are only 3 kinds of people in the world, and there are, as long as you figure out what type of those 3 they are, then you can speak to them on that level. And here's the key: if you get nothing else, hopefully you've gotten lots, but if you get nothing else from today, it's remember your 3 kinds of people. There's library users, there's library supporters, and there's everybody else. And so if the people that the library users, they're the ones that they're coming into every program, they're bringing their kids to story time, they're the people that have to sit at the same computer chair every day. They bring you the zucchini every year so that they can put it in the cardboard box at the desk so that people can come and take some. They're in your doors, they know your name, you know theirs, you're giving them high fives in their usual seat, right? Those are your library users. And so if your board member or your county commissioner or whoever is a library user, then you want to speak to them on library user terms. Now, there's also library supporters. They're the people that maybe they're not in every day, maybe they're not in every week, maybe they have an expired library card, and it doesn't matter because they understand the role that the library plays in the community. They understand how important it is for early literacy. They understand how important the library is for workforce development. They get why the library is there. And so while they may not be in, they're the ones that are going to vote yes for your library when the measures come up. They're the ones that are going to be supporting you. So we've got library users, library supporters, then everybody else, and they're the people that, you know, they're not going to vote for the library because their cows don't read, so why should they have their taxes increase, right? They're the kinds of people that no matter what, they've got it, everything they get is off of Amazon, everything they get, why do we need to go to a library when Google's a thing? No matter what you say, they don't care. Now, I am going to take a stab though and say that if they care enough to be on your board, then they are going to be one of the first two, library user or a library supporter. Where they fall conservatively, liberally, doesn't matter, as long as you can understand where they're coming from. From one side of spectrum to the other, if you can understand where they're at and understand their concerns, the reason that you're not seeing eye to eye, or I'm assuming you wouldn't see eye to eye, is just because they are looking at a problem or looking at a situation from a completely different vantage point than you are. And as soon as you're able to, instead of drag them to your vantage point, but you go over to theirs and see, then the conversation can flow. Then you can help, I guess, explain, oh, I misunderstood where you're coming from, and this is now, I think I get it, and have those conversations that way. But just remember that there's library users, library supporters, and everyone else, and you just need to find out where they are on that level to have that conversation with them.
Thanks, Patrick. Peter, did you have any thoughts?
Sure. Again, I'm like, re-scribbling my notes here. So, one of the reasons every library institute exists, and that's the every library C3, is to do the research around how do we communicate with voters, with Americans, to generate support. There's a saying that everyone loves libraries, but nobody cares, and there's two seminal research papers over the last so many years from OCLC called From Awareness to Funding. That was really the only attempts of the last, 20 years or 30 years, 50 years that I'm aware of to really determine why do people support libraries. So we're not interested in do they like them, do they use them? We're interested in will they support them? Will they vote yes on election day to raise their taxes or tax themselves? And what the research has shown is that actually political persuasion doesn't matter. Library use doesn't matter. Gender doesn't matter. Almost every demographic doesn't matter. The things that correlate with people supporting of the library goes to their perception of the library as a transformational force in the community and their view of librarians, the actual people. And again, anyone who works in a library is a librarian to someone who doesn't work in a library. The view of librarians as being passionate about the health of the community. So those are the things that will generally appeal to people. That the library is a transformational force, and getting the librarians, the actual names and faces of people out. Like, when people say that my librarian is Mary, right? We hear that, right? Mary's my librarian. My kids say it a lot. That shows that they have this connection. To also riff off of Patrick's, there's three types of people. A book that has been really transformational for me is a book called The Three Languages of Politics by Arnold Kling. And he himself is a libertarian, but this book is really designed to talk about how can we have conversations across political divide, right? So, and he breaks up into the three people being progressives, libertarians, and conservatives, and that each has its own worldview and then has language that works with that worldview. Now, not every librarian or library director is progressive. but statistically speaking, the majority are. And what's important is that you know your own proclivities. And so I am a progressive, and so and we tend to, each of us, speak in the language that is our own worldview. So I'm going to go to talking about like equity and social justice and access, and these are things that if I'm talking to a conservative or a libertarian, quite frankly, might be reasons not to support the library. Or at least that they're going to be neutral. They're hearing nothing that's going to appeal to them. So understanding that from a libertarian standpoint, right, their value system is around liberty and is around self-direction. And so we want to talk about things like, the library is that place where anyone can come in and nobody tells you what to think, what to do, what to learn, right? It's the place where by the sweat of your own brow, you can lift yourself up by your own bootstraps. You can teach yourself how to start a landscaping company or code JavaScript and become a contributing member of society, et cetera, right? And to conservatives are focused more on shared culture and history and that preservation thereof. And so you can talk about how the library is that place where we do preserve our local history. And when people move into town or move to our country, if they're refugees or they're immigrants, this is the place always where the immigrant comes to learn what it means to be an American, how to become a part of our community, how to become a part of our society, so that they can contribute back to the economy, so they can contribute back to our right. And so these are the different ways in which we communicate. And so if you don't know who you're talking to, you want to hit all those different points, because generally speaking, if you're hearing a point that doesn't resonate with you, you just kind of tune it out. So if you hear the point that does resonate, you go, okay, I can get with that, I understand that. So generally speaking, that's that's the approach you would want to take. And again, the research suggests that user or non-user really doesn't enter into it in terms of support. So
Thank you, Peter. And then Dan, did you have anything?
Yeah, you were talking about board members and local officials and how to engage them in a meaningful way. You talked about library mission. We already had a lot of talk about mission. Is it based on things or people? Is it a call to action? You may have that down. If you have a board member that doesn't, it's probably important to have some frank, honest conversations with them one-on-one. What is your perception of the library's mission, or the purpose of the library for that matter? Sounds like there's an iceberg issue that needs honest discussion, and that's something maybe holding them back from giving their support, an effort to understand their feelings and thoughts, just like Peter and Patrick have mentioned. But being a board member is to be an open advocate of the library. And an important thing that we ought to do with all our board members, and I applaud everyone that's here today in that afternoon. Thank you for sticking in, and those that are watching this as a recording. It is important to onboard board members, and as directors, we really need to take that seriously, including elected officials. I know on my board that there is an elected official that always sits on the board, and they're not appointed, and you're going to kind of get whoever you get, but it's important to try to educate them if you can as well, and advocate. But if we can do that, it's important to try to understand after the onboarding effort if what their thoughts are, rather than making a judgment on what their motives or actions might be, right? And we tend to follow into that or stereotype them if things aren't going well. If all those honest efforts are made to train, to have good conversation, then maybe there does need to be a discussion with your commission or whoever is in charge of doing that appointing, if it's not an elected board position, of maybe this isn't a good fit for this person, and that's okay. It's good to have that honest feedback. I don't think we want to force a board member into a role that they really don't want to fill, and if they do feel that this just isn't a good fit, then that's okay. We can amicably split on that for sure and do what's best for both parties. It's not, but if you are stuck with a board member that is required to serve and still isn't being a good advocate for you, I think you keep doing the effort that you can. Uh, keep trying to move forward with the supportive majority of the board, continue inviting that board member to see what's done firsthand, just like Peter did with his breakfast, try to keep positive and an open relationship with them. If we shut off, then they will think like that they don't care, but we do care about them and we want them to jump on at some point. But probably one thing to avoid right at the front is if you can hire the right people first, right? If you can have some kind of influence, especially directors, on whoever's doing the appointing, if they have a good vision of the library and where it needs to head, then they can try to help pick good people and don't settle. I know that in our situation for a board is that they try to pick some geographic representation across our large county and they try to mix that up. One of the rounds we had in the last couple years, we were not getting good applications in from the area we were trying to get. But rather than settling on that, we said, well, let's just open this up to a different geographic area that isn't really represented right now on the board. And we found somebody great. And they've been participating ever since. And they're like 40 miles away from the library. So they make a long trip to the library board meeting, but they're participative and they're pushing the library. So try not to settle too. Hire good, try not to settle. And if you're stuck, open conversations.
Thank you all. Really great advice. I'm going to put in a little plug for the state library and just say, if you feel like you've missed your onboarding opportunity and say, well, this guy's been with us for a year, it's never too late with the state library because you can always say, hey, the state library would love to come and do this training. And so that might be a good opportunity to just kind of open the door for maybe some new ideas. So I'll just put that out there. So then our next question is, and we'll go in this order, Peter, Dan, and then Patrick. And the question is, are there outside strategic planning companies the panelists would recommend? What do they do? What funding sources did you use? Are there some key elements that these companies offer that a small library with a small budget could adapt and implement into their strategic plans? So we'll go to you, Peter.
All right. I think my answer is going to be relatively short. And I know I'm coming from a perspective of a larger system. And so as far as the funding sources, we just, budgeted in the regular budget cycle for consulting services for the upcoming year. But we didn't use I specifically didn't use an outside strategic planning company. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't. There's some good ones out there that really focus on strategic planning, but I knew I wanted to take a different approach. And what I was seeing out there was a lot of the more traditional approach that I didn't want to take. So I was inspired by some of the work that was happening at the Richland Public Library in South Carolina. Melanie Huggins is the director there, and I think she's the incoming president of the Public Library Association, and was really using a lot of service design to, again, not so much develop that plan, but to develop a skill set and a mindset in her staff to be more adaptable to the needs of the community. So part one is, let's talk to the community using service design methods and what do they need and want and aspire to, and then how do we use some methodologies and tools to align the library with that in a way that's going to be meaningful and achieve those outcomes. So we hired an architect, Margaret Sullivan Studios, who had worked with the Richland Public Library, and we hired Patrick Quattlebaum, and they had worked together, and he's a service design dude. He's not even the strategic planner. He does service design. He worked for IDEO, if you might have heard of IDEO, and some of those types of organizations. So it was a very different approach. And so I would recommend them if you have the budget and you want the approach, want to take that approach. But I guess to boil that down is consider a different approach besides hiring a traditional company. For the reasons that I kind of laid out in my deeply weird world, talk there, I'd say at least consider that, right? And so an architect is someone who is very people focused, right? I mean, I recently was talking with a friend of mine who's an architect. Said the misconception about architects is that we care about buildings. We don't care about buildings, we care about people. Like the most exciting day is after the building is built and the architect sneaks in to see how is the space actually being used by people, by human beings, right? That's where the rubber hits the road. So whether it's hiring an architect or hiring a service designer or hiring a cultural anthropologist or, I don't know. Having said that, Stephanie Chase is a former library director, has also worked with Marcellus Turner in Seattle and was recently director at Hillsborough Public Library in Oregon. She's now doing full-time consulting and is really thinking very kind of progressively and thinking very human-centered, but also very staff-centered and thinking about how do we do planning and how do we run a library in a way that is really engaging the staff at all levels to be participatory with that. And so if I was out there considering who to hire for a strategic plan, I would seriously consider bringing Stephanie in for, again, that different perspective, for knowing that she would be wanting to engage all staff and be thinking not just in terms of the strategic plan, in terms of the outward facing services and programs and spaces and collections, but thinking inward facing in terms of how does the organization need to operate and be structured? What does our culture and processes need to be for us to be effective and efficient as an organization so that we can deliver on that mission? So, thanks.
Peter's hard to follow. He always is. But I have to admit, we have not engaged a strategic planner for our own plan. We are doing that for Utah Library Association because we haven't had a solid plan for some time. I can tell you some of the things we're learning right off the bat from that. As far as trying to hire someone out, it's costing a couple $1,000s to do it. And so that's got to be an expense you plan for if you're going to do that. And you're going to pay for how many services you want from them. Like, are they going to lead the public input effort? Surveys? Are they going to moderate a strategic planning session with stakeholders or the public? Developing and writing a comprehensive plan with narrative and action steps? Are they doing all that work? Are they going to train the stakeholders on it afterwards and the staff? Or are they going to help even implement the plan? I mean, you can go as big as for just doing one part to many parts. And obviously, the more you ask, the higher you need to pay. So something that Peter gave us for ULA that I thought was a good example is he kind of gave us like a call to work or a draft of what we were going to expect. How much of that work do we actually want out of the job? That's important for the strategic planner to know. So they're actually submitting or at least know what you're looking for. And, what are the major needs that you're gonna have? Once you have some of that outlined, the qualifications of what that person should have, then I'd also ask them for, please submit some samples of your work that's similar to what we're asking for here. Almost like the architect, right? The request for qualifications, show us what you can do. And they should be able to provide that. And you can look through and see if this is kind of what you're wanting to get out of them as part of your determination of who to hire. But I think that's about the main thing I was going to say. I'll pass on to Patrick now.
My answer is even shorter. Since the question is, do I have anyone to recommend? No, I haven't used anyone, so I have no recommendations. I guess I take it back. I have one group that I would recommend. I've always used the Utah State Library or the Idaho Commission for Libraries. So please reach out to your consultants there, and they will be more than willing to help you out. And if they're not, I live a whole state away and you can't throw anything at me from there. So reach out to Utah State Library.
Thank you. We'll take the plug. I wanted to thank all you guys, but we're getting close to wrapping up. The next part, we just wanted to ask one more time if anyone had any other questions for you guys. Anything about strategic planning or the process, anything like that. If feel free to unmute yourself, you can put it in the chat. And I am going to share a link while you're mulling that over. I'm going to put a link in the chat. For a Google form that has a place for us to gather feedback from you guys. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. This will only just take a couple minutes. We're almost at time. Oops. And I'm just going to pull up a short slide. This is, whoops, let me go ahead and present. So we sent this out on the ULN and the PLD listserv. And this is standard number 3 for recertification. Part of the reason why we held this session is that we're looking for feedback from folks on recertification standard number 3, which is the strategic planning. We've heard feedback from librarians that it needs to be updated. And so we wanted to hear from everyone what it is that you want to see. So just really quickly, I've pulled up the slide. You can look at it, you can think about it, you can give us feedback on the form. You can, again, ask any questions that you need to. I'll pull up the chat. And then you're welcome to unmute as well.
Angela did put a question in the chat box.
Oh, I missed it.
That's okay.
If we need, oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, okay. If we need to start a strategic plan from scratch, would you recommend small bites or all at once? Does someone want to tackle that?
No, I think it's like any bigger project, right? Where you sort of have to have the vision of the whole project, but then you have to chunk it out to small steps or it's overwhelming, right? So I'd say it's sort of a both, Angela, is that, you know, start with the small steps, but know where those small steps are in context of, you know, what the next maybe 10 steps are and where you want to get to. And I agree with Daniel. I mean, mission for when we did our roadmap at the city library, the mission part was easy because we looked at it. We said that's in great shape. We're going to leave it be. But if it needs to be rewritten, then that can take more time as well. So, but you don't know that until you start exploring that with staff and the public, right?
And Angela, you mentioned it needs an entire overhaul, and that's a daunting task. You know, I went through that a little bit here a couple years ago, but I think it's an important task, and it's okay, I think, to take time on that. And if we can't get a full plan in on time for, I don't know, State Library can slap my hand for this later, but I think if you were sincerely working on getting a good mission and plan together and it wasn't making it in on time, that's more important than making sure, than just trying to throw a document at them and say, yeah, here's our plan. You know, it's much better, I think, to really be going through the process and trying to, you know, get the staff all on the same page, get the common vision and mission, and then build the goals, and then get a good plan made that can really be pushed out, in my opinion.
Just to piggyback off of that real quick, if it needs an overhaul, a complete overhaul, you only want to overhaul it once. And since your goals and your activities are going to tie into that mission, start like we were saying, I mean, start with the small things so that you can tie everything to that. If you're saying, okay, well, these are the goals that we're going to do, and then you redo your mission and you're completely in a different space, well, then you're coming up with those goals and activities again. So an entire overhaul, yes, daunting, but only overhaul once if you can.
And then different Angela added, what about it being a 3-year plan? Something that my colleague, my peer review, he said, Dan, you ought to write that this is a living document, which I thought was so critical, because we're admitting right there, like, this plan could change, like COVID could happen the last year of the plan and totally throw it out the window, right? So I think 3 years for me has been helpful to kind of at least give me a kind of a goal for my longer term plans. But I think it's also, you know, we write in the plan, this could change, and we might change some of the goals as we're going along throughout the year, but it at least gives us our roadmap of where we're headed. So I don't mind 3 years, but it's well known that could change by year 3.
I'll say to Angela that that's part of the reason why we're having this session, is to find out what people are interested in. And so I would say that we would consider reducing that requirement. Really quickly, I saw that Juan had his hand up, but he disappeared. So if you're still there, Juan, please feel free to speak up.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I think you already answered that in this for anybody on the panel. Thank you so much. It's been very helpful. Now, the mission statement, as we go through the process of meeting with stakeholders, with the public, with our own staff, we may think that, yeah, the mission we have is okay, but pretty soon we may find that, yeah, we need to tweak it because other priorities are rising up. And so I would, in my mind, the mission is not static forever and ever. And it is, I think, healthy to challenge it and say, is this still really relevant? Like Peter said, when you look at it and you say, oh, yeah, it's still pretty good for us, for where we're at. But 3 years, 10 years down the road, it may not exactly be that.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Some of the directors might remember one of our director summits where one of the keynotes asked some of us for our library missions. And I felt so good about the one we had gotten together, and I shared first. And he's like, that's not very inspiring. Let's move on. I was like, dang, that was a burn, right in front of my colleagues. But he was really good after I chatted, and he's really quite friendly. And we had some email conversations after. He's a consultant, and he said, the big thing you're missing is a call to action. How are you inspiring people with this mission? It's getting along the right path, but to me, and he's a board member on his own board, what is the call to action for everybody? Are they going to participate? Is it a library of the people? So it's okay if the mission changes.
Marilee, I'm one of the people who had advocated for kind of getting rid of the 3-year time span, at least for a strategic plan. And I know this doesn't say a strategic plan, it says a long range plan. Because I think there is still a place for longer range planning, particularly around capital and buildings. And that's going to also depend on how many buildings you have and how much growth or change in demographics is happening in your own community. But but I see like as far as the 3-year span, like that might be okay for like that, again, that roadmap of here's our larger strategic areas of focus, as it were. Like it might be literacy and arts and culture and civic engagement or whatever they are for your community, where I could say we should check in on these in 3 years and have that deeper conversation with the community and make sure that these are still aligned. Although again, I would recommend that you're having those conversations sort of continually, so that's being updated. But having an operational plan, like what Dan had showed about, like here's what we're doing and here's the red, green, and orange. I think that might fit more into like it could be like a 6 month to 3 year, depending on what the things are that you're doing. I mean, if it's so, and that's the living document. That's the thing that you're doing the monthly report card, and maybe at the end of the year you say, here's how we did this year. When we started here was our operational plan at the beginning of the year. But even that, as you're going through the months, certain things are rolling off that plan because they're being accomplished, and new things are rolling on because you've freed up capacity, and you're now going, hey, let's take a shot at this. We're going to do these actions to address this need or this outcome for this this area of focus. So that living document idea really speaks to me, and having like an annual wrap up and report on where we're at and what that's looking like is also. So if I sound a little fuzzy, it's because I'm sort of reimagining all of this, like we all are, I think, trying to figure out what makes sense for our libraries and for the world we're living in. But I do think that having that 3-year time span in there might be more restrictive than helpful. Or maybe if we're going to have it in there, having a way of reframing it a little bit. But I don't have a lot of clarity on that.
That's the general feedback. So that's good to hear. I am going to make note of the time. It is 3:59. So if you need to leave, please feel free to sign off. If you have more questions, I'll be on for about another 5 or maybe 10 minutes. And I'm happy to field questions. I do have all of our panelists' contact information. So if they have to, dash out, I can contact them and get answers for your questions for them. But yeah, so if you need to leave,
Okay.
Please feel free. Thank you all
Thank
very
you.
so much. So much. We appreciate your time. And then if anyone did have any of those questions, again, please feel free. I'll be here another 5-10 minutes.
Just wanted to say thanks. I learned a lot. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Nicole asked in the chat, do you have an example of a strategic plan for us to look at? So Nicole, are you directing that question to State Library? Are you asking panelists? So I think Dan and Patrick probably both have their strategic plans on their library websites. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's on our library website, Duchesne Libraries, but also I tried to attach them to this sessions portal in the attendee hub for the plan I showed and the table. Again, that's just my example. I think you ought to look at, it's just like libraries, right? Tour other people's plans and see what the good and bad is that fits with your situation. Mine's not a kill-all. It's just one of the examples.
Ours is not on our library website currently. I had them pull it off since it was 7 years out of date. And so we haven't put the new one back up there yet. I will just kind of echo that and say, look at other libraries. And then I believe the session's being recorded. If we go back through and look at Peter's slides, at least on his one page from the other libraries and things like that, there were links at the bottom of his pages. If that's more what you're looking for, feel free to follow those links and find those. Since he's not here, I'll speak up for him.
And Nicole, I can follow up with you as well. Got it. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? Let's see. I'm going to stop sharing. We do have 24 panelists still in the room. So if anyone has, or I have 24 participants in the room, if anyone has any last questions, please feel free. Okay, guys, I think we can call it a wrap. Just again, thank you so much. I just so appreciate that you guys being willing to come and talk today. Appreciate you so much.
Appreciate everyone listening for 3 hours. That's a long haul in the afternoon. Good job, everybody else.
It went by fast. There's, I think it's a really interesting topic. So lots to think about.
Thanks, Marilee. Thanks for letting me see faces that I haven't seen for years. Flora just showed her camera. One's name came. Oh, I miss you all. Thanks, Utah. You're the best.
I think it
Go
went
Jazz.
really well. So I learned a lot. I took a lot of notes, especially from Peter's presentation.
Perfect.
Okay. Do you want me to end now so the recording ends?
Yeah, I thought I had one. I thought I might have had a question in the chat, but I actually am not sure. Actually, looks like it was a copy and a paste. So I think we're good.
Okay, so I'm stopping the recording.
Okay. All right. Thank you.